I don't believe cages in any way help us heal. I think we find ways as humans because we're magnificent beings. I don't think being tortured helps us.
Welcome to New Thinking from the Center for Court Innovation. I'm Matt Watkins. Hurt people hurt people. That's not an excuse for harm, but it is what fuels much of the criminal legal system. At 19, Marlon Peterson was the lookout for a robbery in Soho, Manhattan. He was unarmed, but 4 people were shot during the robbery. 2 of them died. Peterson spent a decade behind bars. He writes about those years and the childhood that preceded them in his new memoir, Bird Uncaged, an abolitionist freedom song. As a young teen, Peterson was a self-described nerd, a Jehovah's Witness, and 8th grade valedictorian. But he was growing up a young black man in Crown Heights, Brooklyn in the 80s and 90s, the height of the stop and frisk era. He also endured a sexual assault at age 14 and then an accidental shooting. Those traumas stayed with him. I made my own choices, you'll hear him say in this interview, but I didn't choose to experience the type of things I experienced. Peterson now works to ensure fewer young people go through those experiences and to build responses to the cycle of trauma they can initiate that don't involve putting people in cages. Peterson is the founder of the Precedential Group, a social justice consulting firm, and founding coordinator of Youth Organizing to Save Our Streets, one of the Center for Court Innovation's violence interruption programs. He is also a member of our advisory board. A quick heads up, there is some adult language throughout this episode. Now here's my conversation with Marlon Peterson. You know, a lot of the book, it seems to me, is, at least in the early parts, is about hiding. You hiding who you were and you hiding some of the bad things that happened to you as a young person. But then in the book, you tell it all. Is that like really the journey that you most wanted to tell in some ways?
It's a journey that came out in the ideation phase of this book. I knew a couple things. I knew that I needed to tell a story that was bigger than me. I knew I wanted to tell a story that illuminated prison, but didn't center prison, like the physical prison. And I knew I wanted to write an honest book. I think for the most part, at least in the professionally, as an advocate, as a strategist, or what have you, people know I went to jail, they know that sort of stuff. But I think, people know like the polished me. I mean, I've written about different things before and I've spoken about things, but it's still a polished part. And I think sometimes that gives a misconception that like one, prison worked, one, that it gives a misconception that people, that those of us who've gone through certain situations, who've maybe gone through various types of prisons or lived in certain types of communities, had these similar, or sexual abuse, all those sort of things, that the past doesn't impact the present. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to write something dishonest, because that's not true. It's not true, and we all hide them in various ways. Some of us don't choose to write about it or talk about it, and that's fine. Like, that just happened to be a gift or a skill that I like, and writing does a lot for me. So I decided to let it out that way. But I want people to be truthful, because I think that's the only way we get to some of the thing, get to the type of answers to things and our problems that we are striving to get, even in the policy world.
You said something there that struck me about wanting to tell a story that was bigger than you. What was that bigger story, bigger than you, that you wanted to tell?
I think that we all are dealing with these things, and that you don't need to go through incarceration to feel some of these feelings, right? And that incarceration is just the most visible display of like human trauma and hurt. I always say this about my time inside. I fell in love with humanity through experiencing people in prison, because I saw people at the absolute worst, and I understood. I was being around them in conversation, and they sleeping in the bed next to me or above me, below me, wherever we're at. I got to understand that they were more than whatever it is that they were there for. And that developed a love for me, developed a love for humans, and the humans that we hate the most.
The epigraph of the book is, "I don't believe in cages of any kind." Before you get to the literal cage of prison, did it feel for you like you were inhabiting several cages growing up? Your parents are undocumented Trinidadian, so that there's a cage there. You're a young black man, as we said. height of the stop and frisk era, your behavior's getting criminalized left and right. Is that what you mean about not believing in cages of any kind?
Absolutely. I mean, in a literal way. But I do mean that, like all these other things were happening. Like and these things create cages for us as people in our own families, in our household, in our, in our schools. And when I say by cages, the things that prevent us from being the most like liberated versions of ourselves, right? Being liberated from trauma that happened to us, right? All of us, that we all can sit down in one room and talk about trauma that we've hidden or we committed, and those things impact people. And then there's the most extreme one, prison, And so I don't believe I don't believe cages in any way help us heal. I think we find ways as humans, because we're magnificent beings, we find ways, whether through being in community with other people, therapy, whatever it is, religion, whatever works for you, but we find it that way. I don't think being tortured helps us.
I mean, another cage of a sort you mentioned several times in the book is masculinity and having to perform a kind of certain version of that. Like, what role did that play in your story?
Everybody talk about the neighborhood, the old neighborhood, right? You hear a lot of people who made it, quote unquote, they talk about the old neighborhood. And the old neighborhood usually is riddled with a lot of love and joyful experience, but it's also riddled with a lot of harm and hurt and brutal shit. And in some ways, we like required to survive, but you got to be a little tougher. You got to perform that. You got to make sure that other men, other people don't see you as somebody that you can be preyed upon. It's like some regular primal shit. And I get it, but I also know that is not who I wanted to be. It's who I felt like I had to be. I always give an example. Like, you see a little child, you want to, cuddle and kiss and play in the air and you're tickling, ha ha ha, and all that sort of stuff. And by the time they're like young as 12, 13, 14, 17, whatever it is, he, and even she or they, potentially could be this rough person, in some ways trying to act tougher than the next person because they feel they got to survive because of some experiences that they had or saw. And they're no longer that person you want to hug and kiss and whatnot, right? They may scare you now. And they may intentionally make you scared of them too. The harmful parts of our masculinity, let me just say that, the harmful parts of our masculinity comes out even more so. And we got to perform it for each other because we think we need to survive. And that's not, when you're doing it, not because you want to, but because you think you have to survive. It's like you being in a cage. It's some shit I had to do in prison, not because I wanted to, but because I had to survive. I had to like not communicate with people. I had to have a stoic face. I had to show no emotions. Like, I didn't want to do that, but I had to perform that. It was a performance, and it worked, right? It worked. But I'm just saying that, like, when you think about masculinity and the harmful parts of masculinity, people call it toxic masculinity, what have you. Like, there are parts of it that we don't want to be, but we have to be, we feel we have to be to survive. And that, to me, that's suffocating. And a lot of, and sadly, so many of us, when you think about gun violence, I know you want to talk about that at some point, but when we think about violence in our communities, that's people trying to breathe, gasp for air.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of thinking about making decisions for other people rather than for ourselves, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, the robbery that landed you in prison for 10 years as a very young man. You were just a lookout on that robbery, but 4 people end up getting shot. 2 of them died. You wrestle with that really openly in the book. I mean, looking back on it now, how do you understand what led to that decision for you?
I always think back to it's funny. You called me at a time, literally, I just got off my Zoom call with my therapist. So you called me at a real vulnerable time.
All right.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Yeah, I think, the sexual assault that I write about in the book had nothing to do, like, in any sort of literal, linear sense with the robbery as a part of 5 years later. Like, that moment fucked me up. I don't know how I can't say no other way. It fucked me up in a way that only I could see it, right? And
you weren't sharing it with anybody. You didn't tell anybody about it.
I didn't tell anybody until I was already in prison, facing the life sentence at the time. I wasn't sentenced yet, I was facing life at the time. When going back to that cage of masculinity, I didn't want people to think I was soft. I didn't want to think at that time, because I was homophobic as a kid, I didn't want anybody to think I was gay because it was a man that assaulted me. So I was like, I can't tell nobody about that, right? I don't want anybody making fun of me and all that sort of stuff, so I just kept it. And so by the time the opportunity for a robbery had happened, I mean, I was shot a year before I was robbed. It might have been by a friend, but I was still in that place. I went from this honorable, smart, nerdy Jehovah Witness kid to now this kid who's out here just wading in the wind without giving any excuse. Like, I'm not trying to say in any way that, this is why this happened, so that's why I wanted to be robbing people. No, I chose to be a part of that, right? But I also did not choose to experience the type of things I experienced, and I didn't know how to react to it. And I reacted to it in a way that wasn't helpful to people. And I did, but I was around people, and I was around people that at certain times I felt safe around, that could protect me, or not even protect me, it made me feel like I wouldn't be preyed upon. And a certain mindset that came along with that. And so I put myself around a different type of circle. And that's what we did in that circle. These things aren't hard to happen, particularly when you're in an environment where a lot of people are going through the same type of hurt and harm, but not telling anybody. Like, the reason why I grapple with it so much in the book, because I grapple with it so much in life. One of my first jobs when I came home from jail was to work with, the CCI program, SOS, right? I was one of the first 3 violence interrupters that they had. And that's when nobody knew what a violence interrupter was, right? And I would go to these shooting responses, organize these shooting responses, be with family members who were killed, who had lost family members, go to hospitals, or go to people's home. I was in that. And I would be like, they wouldn't know who I was and my history. They wouldn't know my history necessarily. They may have known I went to jail. But I can literally remember being at shooting responses and at these public vigils where we're like lighting candles and all this sort of stuff. And in my mind, I'm like, somebody else had to go through this because of me. Right? And that's me. Like, nobody knew that. Or when they were like, I remember like Ife Charles, who works with the center, like, and she was so great at that. It's considered like a big sister to mine. And and she was so great at interacting with people in the community. And I know so many times she would like, when like we light this candle or whatever, say that name of that person who you may have lost. And I would say the name of the people who were lost, who were killed.
In the robbery,
I would say their names, right? Because like, I didn't kill them, I didn't shoot them, I didn't have a gun, but like, I know I'm associated with it. And I know that like, to this day now, 2021, that like, they may think about that and they would know that my name is associated. They don't know who I was or my background or whatever. They just know that I was a part of that. And I know that. Like, I know that. And so that grappling, that, I'm at a place where it no longer overwhelms me, but it used to. And that's why I wanted to address that in the book, because oftentimes I think people think that for those of us who may have been formerly incarcerated and committed harm, and we're doing all this sort of stuff, and maybe even achieving some level of success from the work that we get to do, that in some way we've just dismissed the past. Like, the past happened. I'm fully aware of I'm fully aware of it. And I wanted people to see that, like, I want people to understand that.
In some ways, a lot of the work that you've done, on yourself to be the person, the really impressive person you are today, happened in prison, but it's pretty clear you don't buy into this prison as a place to go for redemption. You went in there, you're 19 years old, and you're there for 10 years. Having had that experience, what do you think prisons are for? Why are they the way that they are?
I think prisons are what we do as society we sacrifice people for the facade of safety and order. And what I mean by that is that often make these jokes, not make the joke, but allude to this joke, reference this joke. We all have been to the place, we've heard comedians or we've joked with our friends or what have you, don't drop the soap, you go to prison, we make these jokes. And I have too. I'm not knocking you, I'm not one of the people judgmental for you making a joke, whatever. The point I'm getting to is that, like, we are subconsciously, at the very least subconsciously, but I think most of us are consciously aware that people are harmed in prison, like on a very carnal level. We are aware of it. Yet still there's a part of us that, like, a cognitive dissonance that happens that says that, well, maybe they deserve that. And that will make them better. Prison is what we know how to deal with people who have broken a social contract, right? That's what we had before. And that has expanded into all type of things, right? Beyond just homicide and sexual assault to all type of things, right? But in terms of the utility of prison, like, there's a utility in isolating people who might be a danger to others. But the idea that we were, everybody going to space now, right? Bezos, everybody going to space. They found some people came back to Earth and they saw prisons as the idea of how we fix the problems in society, they would probably be like, how is that possible? These are where all the hard things happen, all the most horrible things happen in concentrated spaces. And that's where we want to fix society. And going back and I feel like Dostoevsky always says that you can tell the degree of a civilization by entering its prisons. And then so it makes sense when we look at our society and the levels of violence that we have in our societies. It's like we live in one big ass prison.
But you write that over your time in prison, you became less confined by your confinement. How do you understand that? What was behind that?
I said before that, like, me being around people, struggling with and overcoming my biases and prejudice toward different types of people, not only about race, but also like religion, personal background, gang affiliation, like all those type of things. I had biases and prejudice towards people, and I learned their humanity, but also, and that opened me up to things about me that I needed to sort of like reckon with. And I think like when I really started intentionally helping other people inside, like in various ways I was able to, like I saw freedom in that. There's more to life. And particularly, I want to say, particularly, like in the book I write about a lot about like, the programs that I did or was a part of when I was upstate. But even before I was sentenced, I mean, I wasn't involved with a lot of the, there were no programs or anything like that down here on Manhattan House, Rikers Island, all that sort of stuff. But people knew I had some level of intelligence, right? So I would help people out with writing letters or whatever it was. And that helped me. Like that helped me in the sense that I was being useful to somebody. It gave me a way to be out of here. Like I wasn't just a throwaway person. Prison tells you you're a throwaway person, particularly when you're facing a life sentence. Like you're throwaway. Like a life sentence means we threw you away. And we can justify that or not, but life sentence means that you have been thrown away from society, and that's what I was facing. So yeah, so like that, just being able to be of use to other people, I think it really was the way in which I kind of like was able to like not be confined by the confinement,
I was struck by something else in the book with the way you write about America and the kind of founding of America and the big lie, in a sense. It's founded on the exclusion of Black people, of women. And we're talking now about what aliens would think about if they came and saw our prisons. And you write that you aim to be a better un-American. I'd love to hear you explain that a bit.
Yeah, I feel like I should get that as a T-shirt. Getting to the core of who we are as individuals, as I try in this book, I try to model in the book like the core of like my best possibilities and the core of my worst possibilities, and be open about that. And then choose to be the better part. I think I've been thinking about America, like what we tend to do, even now with the public debate around critical race theory, we are choosing not to accept the worst parts of in terms of like this nation. We like it's a convenient, it makes us feel better culturally, but we're losing out on the opportunity to sort of, in so many ways, to appreciate the worst parts of us and not choose to do it again. Well, I'm thinking, I don't want to be like that. I'm American. I was born here. Of course, I brag about Brooklyn all the fucking time. Brooklyn happens to be, even though we like to call Brooklyn the Republic of Brooklyn, but Brooklyn happens to be a part of America. Of course, I love this place, but I don't want to be like it. And I don't think we should. I think we should we need to figure out how to be less like how it has always showed itself up to be.
In terms of like not repeating the worst parts of ourselves, again and again, there's this spike in gun violence, right? That's happening right now in cities across the country. And we're seeing the same kind of debate about what to do about it. But first, I'd love to hear from you what you think is behind the spike that we've been seeing now.
Our custom in America is that every summer violence spikes. That's a custom, right? If you look at the data, that's sadly our custom. I'm not saying that just because our custom we're supposed to be okay with. I'm just saying that that's the evidence. The second thing I want to add to that is that when you think about the spikes in gun violence, there's also been a spike in gun purchases. There's been a spike in that over the pandemic. And I always think about, like, imagine that during the health pandemic where people are dying, the thing that people bought more in this country were weapons. We got more guns than people in America. Yeah, guns don't kill people, people kill people. I get all that shit. The point I'm saying that, like, there is a commitment to something that kills. So I'm just saying, like, why do you think that people in the hood ain't gonna do it too? Like, why do we think that? Why do we expect people, black and brown people in the hood, to be better than America? And I want to add on some real things. Like, over the pandemic, it's a couple of things. One is people are all dealing with the heightened stress and anxiety of people dying, their aunts, their uncles, their mamas working extra hours at the clinic or at the hospital. There's less money in the household. There's more people cramped. Schools, people aren't really in school, even though there's remote learning. As parents know that remote learning is stressful. They don't know what the hell going on. So I don't know, what do you think? The kids don't know what the hell going on. Now they're outside, they have all these beef, they're on social media, and now they have access to weapons along with all the anxiety and stresses and depression that adults are dealing with. And now you outside now. Now I can see you. We outside. Now we can do it. And it's just all these anxieties that people don't think kids got to deal with. Kids dealing with it too. The pandemic ain't just because the older folks are the ones who are catching it and dying from it, more vulnerable from it. Let me say that, vulnerable to it. Doesn't mean like young people aren't dealing with it. I dealt with hard stuff and I didn't know what I was doing. What do you think these kids are doing?
Yeah, and then, I mean, we're hearing, I mean, in response to the what do we do about this question, we're hearing renewed calls of we need more police, we need more punishment, we need more incarceration. That's the answer to this.
Listen, I think that, once again, it's our reflex. And I understand, first of all, that we want to do something. And so I get it. Like, I understand as a human, these things are hard to hear and see and experience and witness. So we want something to happen right away. Stop it now. I get that. Over the last, like particularly here in New York, right? Or in New York, there was the beginning of 2020 was like bail reform. I remember within a couple of weeks of bail reform, they said bail reform ain't working. Fine, whatever, right? And that's fine. Not fine, but I get that. We are in a place now where more people are thinking about ways of dealing with community issues that aren't just how we've done it in the past. Right? Whether it be abolition, whether it be defund, whether it be community, whatever it is, we are literally trying to think about different ways of handling things so that we don't repeat the same trauma. And in this year and a half to 2 years of people just saying it, like, things haven't really been fully implemented in a lot of places, right? Might have been money allocated, but it hasn't really been fully allocated. We're not given 2 years for these things to work. But yet somehow, we also know that policing hasn't worked since whenever, but like 2 years and we had a spike and y'all didn't stop the crime in your community, it ain't working. Like, you got to give it, why wouldn't we give us the same grace? I think we're in a place, Matt, where I think that, like, I said this to someone recently, that I think as policymakers, but definitely as citizens here, it's great that people in community are more invested in figuring out ways to deal with the problems in our communities without the reliance on outside forces. I think that's what we want. That's community efficacy, where there are more people that we're saying we can do it, and we're figuring it out. But we want people to be engaged. That's a democracy, right? And I think it's like, that's what democracy is. The people are figuring this out. I think I want people to sort of just in some ways give grace to the fact that there's so many people formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated people who never had incarceration experience, all trying to figure out ways of where we can create safety in our communities and longevity that doesn't require us sacrificing our sanity.
I mean, based on your experience as a young man, I mean, do you think fear of punishment, deterrence really has any effect on the decision making that mostly young people, that's what we're talking about, that mostly young people are making? Like, oh, well, bail reform has changed this, so therefore I'm going to do that? Or
when you're young and when you're in the moment, you're just kind of trying to figure out the moment. And yeah, you know that you can get arrested. And yeah, I mean, things like bail reform, nobody know the fuck that is. Nobody, they're just like, oh, word, son, I can word, I ain't going, like, they don't know, right? That's not in the decision-making process, right? They're not thinking out that, like, they're not the mob. But so, I mean, they're thinking about the moment, what our job, what our work, or the work of people who are committed to healing and helping and preventing harm from these young folks that they have to heal from later, is to be able to get to them in these moments, or before they get to these moments. It doesn't matter. They all know you can go to jail. I knew I could go to jail. Like, ain't nobody get a robbery, but people don't usually go to jail for robberies. Well, no, we knew that. Oh, like you got a gun, but people don't usually go to jail for guns, even though they stopping us every day on the street when we ain't got nothing. Like we know that. It's just like in a moment, it's kids, but kids are reacting to trauma and kid shit and adolescents wanting to fit in and all that. It's just that like the options for rebellion are way more egregious now.
I want to switch gears kind of radically for a second here and ask you about steel pan, the steel drum, and the role of that for you, like as a young person, and I think still today. Could you talk a little bit about what that's brought to you?
That's my piece. Even as a kid, that was peace. I think, my father played in Trinidad as a young man, and my older brother and older sister, they played, and I followed the tradition. I mean, I didn't always realize it was a tradition. I just felt like it was just what we do. But it's something about like being lost in it that always mesmerized me. Even in that teenage years when I was going through things, like I would leave my block and I would, because where we used to practice would be either in Flatbush or other places, and I lived in Crown Heights. But wherever we were, it took me away every night. You go there every night from about 6 or 7 o'clock, and sometimes it'd be, as a 15-year-old, super late. Like I'd come home like 12, 1 in the morning. So it was also like, but I was safe and I was doing something that like gave me a literal peace of mind, So, and even while I was inside, it was interesting, like there was some time, depending on what jail I was in, the little radio that we had, I had a Walkman, I could get a signal where I would hear some of the pan, right? That's the only time I would hear it. And that would take me away from prison, right? I could remember, like, it would literally take me out of it, not literally, but figuratively take me out of there. So even as an adult, and I still play now, it's a safe space for me. It's like writing. I'm not the best pan player in the world. I ain't trying to, don't think I'm gonna come out and do a solo at the next event. But as a part of a band, I get to dance and sway and be lost in it. You see, when I talk about interventions in the moment about kids, like it wasn't an anti-crime intervention, but it did. I never got into problems when I played pan, and Flatbush wasn't a safe area either. I ain't trying to like Flatbush, Brooklyn was safe. It was crazy. The 67th precinct, one of the worst precincts in the city in terms of violent crime. But in that space, it was an intervention from my everyday things. It met me in the moment of all my trauma and took care of me. And that's what I mean, like trying to find ways to meet these young folks, different ways. Steel pan for me, some people's music, some people's ball, some people is rock, whatever it is, I don't know, but like it gave me a sense of peace. And I think that's what we all tend to want, particularly when we have so much chaos around us.
In the book, you're recounting toward the end of your time in prison, you say that you were in the process of becoming whole. And I'm just wondering where you feel you are now in relationship to that goal.
I think I'm in a good place. I would say like when I finished writing that book, literally when I pressed enter, when I pressed enter to my editor, I felt like I cried and I felt like a weight was lifted. So I finally like let things out. The book starts off with the chapter is hiding and the last chapter is un-American and free. And I didn't know that it was going to end up that way. It just turned out like, oh shit, just how it is. But I think being whole is a lifelong process, for one, but I definitely think I'm much more aware of the tools that I have at my disposal. I think, sometimes particularly growing up, you don't have the tools, obviously, because you haven't lived enough life. And then definitely you may not know how to identify it and definitely how to use them. And I think I'm way more aware of the tools at my disposal to deal with harm and trauma, because the trauma didn't go away. It didn't unhappen. The shit happened, and it still lingers in various ways. But I'm aware of the tools that I have to be able to cope with it in a better and more healthy way. I know the people around me. I know that people care for me. I know people feel I'm deserving. I know that I am deserving, right? I know that things that happened to me were unfair. Like I can say that out loud. Some shit that happened was unfair to me, and that's a part of my process. So I'm definitely in a much better place. I thank you for that question. Thank you for that question, man.
Well, thank you for that answer. And Marlon, thank you for this interview. I really appreciate you making the time, and congratulations again on the book. And I can't wait to see what you do next with the book, also with your work. And I look forward to reading more of you in print. So thank you so much.
Well, whatever I do is going to be for people work. So as long as I can keep impacting people's lives in a positive way, So I'm looking forward to it. And thank you for this time.
That was my conversation with Marlon Peterson. Marlon is the founder of the Precedential Group, a social justice consulting firm, and the host of the Decarcerated podcast. His new memoir is Bird Uncaged, an abolitionist freedom song. For more information about Marlon and today's episode, click the link in your show notes or go to courtinnovation.org/newthinking. Today's episode was edited and produced by me. Samiha Mia is our Director of Design. Emma Dayton is our VP of Outreach. Our theme music is by Michael Aaron at quivernyc.com. And our show's founder is Rob Wolf. Special thanks as well today for all of the comradeship and collaboration on this show to my friend, Julian Adler. This has been New Thinking from the Center for Court Innovation. I'm Matt Watkins. Thanks for listening.